Hi there. Lindsey Sparks here with the next episode of Read by the Author. Today, we continue Echo in Time, the first book in the Echo Trilogy, read by the author, which is me, Lindsey Sparks. And now, let's return to the story. Chapter 16, Do and Don't. I shouldn't have been surprised when I found Marcus lounging outside the entrance to my building the following morning. I shouldn't have been, but was. He leaned with his back against the building's worn bricks, staring up into a sky that was almost perfectly clear. The stark contrast of his very short, very dark hair and long black eyelashes against the rich golden hues of his skin and eyes was even more striking in the early morning sunlight. As usual, he was impeccably dressed in slate gray tailored slacks and a black wool coat, and over it all he wore confidence, like he had invented it. He embodied what almost every man wanted to be, and who almost every woman wanted to be with. "Where's the photographer?" I asked as I exited the building. His enthralling gaze locked onto me, and with the faintest shift in facial muscles, his jaw became more chiseled, his lower lip more luscious. He was so goddamn good at being irresistible. It was preposterous. Slinking down several concrete steps, I closed the distance between us. I had dressed carefully, picking out a snug boat-neck crimson sweater and my most flattering jeans, paired with dark leather boots that nearly reached my knees. With my second favorite coat, a hip-length forest green pea coat, my ensemble emphasized the few curves my slender body actually had. From the way Marcus's eyes narrowed as I approached, I could tell my clothing choice was having the desired effect. I wanted him to crave me so badly that he'd forego his ridiculous claim that nothing would happen between us for days, or even weeks. I needed his real, physical lips to press against mine, his hands to caress me in a moment of uncontrollable passion. I needed evidence that whatever was happening between us was real. I needed something in my life to feel real. Mimicking his pose, I leaned against the brick wall beside him, our wool sleeves nearly touching. "The way we look, it's just part of being Nejaré," Marcus said silkily. I cocked my head, watching him watch me. "We change more in the year after we manifest than in the rest of our long lives, and then we are forever altered, not human, other." He sounded slightly disgusted. Does he not like being Nejaré? "I don't care," I said, hoping to dispel his suddenly glum mood. "If I were a photographer, I'd beg you to be my model." Admittedly, part of me was trying to provoke him, trying to get him to loosen his rigid control. I was hoping to reduce days or weeks to seconds or minutes. Rotating abruptly, Marcus planted his hands on either side of me and blocked the outside world with his body. Somehow, not an inch of him was touching me. I wanted to growl in frustration. "What will change about you, little Ivanov?" he whispered. Apparently, he'd taken a liking to manipulating my grandfather's surname into his own pet name for me. The cage of flesh and bone was redundant. Marcus's penetrating gaze, again more gold than amber, pinned me in place better than any physical restraints possibly could. "Why can't I keep you just as you are?" "Maybe I won't change," I said softly. He chuckled, causing goosebumps to pebble my skin. "You've already started. Your eyes have deviated so far from normal human coloring that you'll have to start wearing contacts soon." "Is that what you do?" I asked. Usually his eyes were a rich, black-rimmed amber color, but today they paled to liquid gold. When he nodded, I said, "But not always." The corner of his mouth quirked. "No, not always." I reached my right hand up and traced the sharp contours around his eyes from brow to cheekbone. "I like you better like this, au naturel." He smirked, raising a single eyebrow. "So, what were your big changes?" I asked, running my fingers along his jaw. I couldn't imagine a single piece of him different than it was at that moment.
It's hard to describe. Maybe I'll take you back sometime. Let you decide,
he said. I was about to tell him that I might just peek into the past on my own, that I didn't need him to guide me around the Ot. But he leaned down, inching his mouth past my lips, chin, jaw, never touching. Speech evaded me. With his nose barely skimming the skin beneath my ear, he inhaled. The noise he made upon exhaling was rough and animalistic, both satisfied and laden with unfulfilled need. Again, I could feel the blood rushing to my belly and lower, moistening and swelling certain sensitive parts in preparation for what my body wanted, for what I wanted.
Time to go, Lex,
he said, his voice barely audible, and entwined the fingers of one hand with mine. He pulled me away from the wall, and hand in hand, we headed toward Denny Hall and the work that awaited us. After hours of phone calls and emails arranging interviews with potential field school students, I finally left the pit and stepped outside to stretch my legs. I found it slightly amusing that I had done nothing remotely archaeological for the past 2 days, not since deciphering the riddle at the end of Senenmut's tablet and possibly discovering the secret temple entrance, and instead was helping Dominic arrange the field school logistics. Interviewing, selecting, and prepping the students who would be the rough equivalent of his slaves for several months was apparently too menial a task for Marcus.
Help Dom,
Marcus had told me as we'd arrived that morning. But shouldn't I be using my deciphering skills? What happened to...
Your job is to uncover Hatshepsut's many secrets, Miss Larson,
I'd asked him, doing a fair job of imitating his confident tone and complex accent. He had chuckled.
You've already advanced us greatly with the tablet. Now, I need you to help Dominic.
If you say so, boss, I'd teased before joining Dominic at the far end of the room. Marcus had disappeared from the pit shortly thereafter, and I hadn't seen him since. Early in the afternoon, I left the warmth of Denny Hall, intending to take a walk despite the weeping sky. Once outside, I made it about 20 feet. Just as I was nearing the building's southwest corner, the sound of 2 very angry voices stopped me in my tracks, Marcus and Nephi. Unabashedly, I slinked closer to the smooth, gray stone wall, inching toward the corner and the argument. "You are unbelievable!" Nephi shouted in exasperation. "I cast my lot with you, put my trust in you for how many years? And now you want to risk it all for some...
As I said, child, this is none of your concern, Marcus growled.
Child? Me? She is the child. Why her, huh? After so long, why her? At least tell me that," Nephi yelled. In a tone so cold I could almost feel the weak rain turning to icy needles, Marcus warned,
"You forget yourself, girl."
"I forget nothing," Nephi hissed, right before she barreled around the corner, straight into me. "Crap!" I exclaimed. Had I not just been caught eavesdropping on a woman who seemed to despise me and the man I desperately wanted to jump into bed with, Nephi's expression would have been funny. Instead, seeing her perfectly made-up face frozen in shock, seeing her artfully arranged curls out of place, made me cringe. She looked scary as hell. A normal person would step back and attempt to compose themselves if they ran headlong into someone. Nephi was far from normal. She leaned in close and whispered, "If you ruin this, I swear." Razor-sharp, lyrically beautiful syllables cut her off mid-threat. I had no idea what Marcus had just said, but Nephi's reaction, her features going slack as she stumbled backward, told me he hadn't been talking about fluffy bunnies and milkshakes. She rushed into the building, or at least I think she rushed into the building. My attention had been completely hijacked by the thundercloud of a man approaching me.
How much did you hear? He asked, his voice hard.
I'm not sure. It didn't really make sense.
With a frigid laugh, Marcus said, No, I don't imagine it did.
Are you two, or were you two, involved? I asked shakily. It had sounded like a lover's spat, and I really wasn't interested in taking on an other woman role, not even for Marcus. His responding laugh shed some of the chill, sounding almost tepid.
No, Lex, definitely not.
I felt a sudden rush of relief. Oh.
Neffy won't bother you again, but perhaps you should go home for the day, he suggested.
Thank you, but no. I don't know if she thinks this excavation belongs to her or what, but I won't let her drive me away. Marcus's lips pursed slightly, like he was trying not to smile.
Very well, he said. Just don't leave too late. I'll pick you up at 7 this evening. Don't forget.
Unwilling to let him tease me into a pile of goo again, I stood up straighter. I'm going to get back to work.
I'll walk you up,
Marcus said, leading the way to the door and holding it open. So, what's the plan for tonight? Where are we going?
It's a surprise.
For what seemed like the first time in my life, I was ready early. I had been sitting in my usual kitchen chair, shaking the leather-clad foot of my crossed leg, when the knock sounded at the door. I bounced up and clacked across the hardwood floor in my knee-high boots. I opened the door and offered a breathy, "Hi." Marcus looked more amazing than usual in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit and a faintly striped white dress shirt. The top 2 buttons were undone, making him look a little relaxed and slightly less intimidating than usual. His golden tiger eyes scanned me slowly from the toes up, narrowing to predatory slits by the time they reached my face.
Lex, he purred. You look ravishing.
I plushed. I turned into a stuffed animal. I blushed at the compliment. I was wearing the only remotely acceptable date dress I had. It was a form-fitting burgundy silk sheath that reached just below mid-thigh. I had left my hair down, its dark, loose waves reaching the bottom of my shoulder blades. You don't look too bad yourself, I mused, watching his eyes glitter at the understated compliment. Marcus, I was sure, was more used to women saying things like, "Oh, you're so beautiful, do me right now," or, "You're the most handsome man I've ever met." Sure, I was thinking both at the moment, but I figured his ego didn't need any additional boosting. He sighed dramatically.
As much as I hate to say it, I must advise you to cover up your delectable outfit with a warm coat. It's snowing.
He said snowing like it was a disgusting wad of gum stuck to the bottom of one of his Armani shoes. What? Really? I asked, instantly giddy. Abandoning Marcus in the open doorway, I rushed to the living room window to peer out into the night. Outside of the pools of light coming from the street lamps, large fluffy flakes of snow were nearly invisible, making the glowing areas look like conical snow globes.
Do you always get this excited about snow? Marcus asked from directly behind me, slipping the sleeves of a black wool trench coat, my third favorite coat, up my bare arms and over my shoulders.
No, I said, laughing. Only in this city. It never snows here.
I see,
he said, reaching around me to fasten the top button of my coat. Unlike the previous time he had tried to bundle me up, I didn't swat his hands away. He moved closer, pressing the front of his suit against my backside from shoulders to mid-thigh. His delicious, spicy scent, like a mixture of cinnamon and nutmeg, enveloped me along with his arms. Even through the fabric of our clothing, his body felt like layers of powerful, hard-packed muscle. I let my arms dangle, feeling electrically alive with his immense strength wrapped so gently around me. It was like I was a kitten in the lethal clutches of a panther, and I'd never felt more safe. His wrists lightly skimmed my breasts several times as he fitted the first black disc through its intended slit. Yeah, he did. With each descending button, an increasingly familiar fluttering amplified in my abdomen. It began like the usual butterflies that burst into life whenever I was around a man I was interested in, but by the third button, located a few inches below my navel, the butterflies had morphed into something larger and more substantial. By the fourth and final button, located directly over my pubic bone, it felt like I had a charm of hummingbirds buzzing around inside me, my whole body thrumming with their frenzied rhythm. Marcus lingered long enough on that lowest enclosure to assure me of his eventual intentions without seeming overtly improprietous. Oh, he definitely seemed improprietous, just not overtly so. When he stepped away, my breathing was noticeably quickened, and I had forgotten the snow entirely. Somehow, putting on a heavy winter coat had been the single most erotic experience of my entire life. Damn, I am in way over my head. Marcus cleared his throat. We should go. I took a moment to compose myself before turning. Certainly, I said with forced cheerfulness. I didn't want to go anywhere. I wanted to stand in that exact spot while the man before me removed everything I was wearing with the same agonizing attention he had just used to button my coat. I accepted his outstretched arm, slipping my hand into the crook of his elbow, and we departed my apartment. We left behind most of the sexual tension. Unfortunately, Marcus created the stuff like an industrial fog machine. So what kind of car is this anyway? I asked as he helped me into the same low coupe he'd driven me home in days before. It was slate gray, sleek, and a perfect match for its driver. An Aston Martin Vantage, Marcus told me, getting into the driver's side. Oh, wow, I said, trying not to touch anything unnecessarily. I was about as far as you could get from being a car person, but I wasn't completely clueless. It's, really nice. He laughed, a deep, throaty sound. I agree. It's my favorite. I couldn't tell if he meant it was his favorite car in the world or his favorite among his own car collection. He's not just an archaeologist, I reminded myself. He's a Nezarete and a member of the Council of Seven. The short drive passed in aching, palpable silence. Though most of my mental power was focused on not jumping the driver, I did manage to spare a few thoughts about where we were going. We skirted the western edge of campus and its many apartment buildings until we reached Ravenna, the adorable neighborhood abutting the university's northern edge. Fraternities and sororities filled the first few blocks with their deceptively beautiful exteriors, slowly giving way to the ivy-colored porches and manicured gardens of a truly residential area. Some of the university's wealthier faculty members and scholars occupied the stately mixture of brick homes and craftsman bungalows. Unless there's an unmarked restaurant here, I'm assuming this is your house, I said as we pulled into a narrow gravel driveway. In Ravenna, the presence of any driveway was a sign of luxury. Not that the house needed it. I examined my new surroundings as I emerged from the car. The house was ash gray with white trim and had an adorable porch spanning the entire front. The centered brick steps leading up to the porch were lined with clay pots brimming with purple, red, and white pansies. Welcome to my home away from home, Marcus said as he reached for my hand and led me into the house. On the walk from the entryway to the dining room, I peered around at the warm furnishings and tasteful decorations. It was comfy, but nothing I would have expected from Marcus, decor-wise. In the dining room, a square oak table was set for two with the extravagant complexity and perfection of an Edwardian steward. There were more pieces of silverware than I knew what to do with. Why, Marcus, I said, laughing. Are you making me dinner? He chuckled as he held out the chair before the nearest place setting, waiting for me to sit. He sat at the spot on the adjacent side of the table and said, Definitely not. My culinary repertoire is... His lips widened to a self-effacing grin. Dated. Breakfast is my strong point. His grin turned wicked, knowing.
What do you prefer in your omelets, little Ivanov?
I, of course, blushed furiously at the implication that he would one day be making me breakfast, likely after I had spent the night tangled with him in bed. I had never been a big blusher, and it was becoming an irritating habit. Like the flip of a switch, Marcus's face blanked, and he explained, My man, Carlyle, is preparing everything tonight. His food is as good as any I've ever eaten, which is saying something. Besides, I thought we'd need a little privacy. His lips quirked, but his face remained expressionless. For your questions, of course. I raised my eyebrows at his veiled presumptions. Before I could comment, a man, Carlyle, entered the room carrying 2 small plates. He definitely wasn't the seasoned older gentleman I had expected for someone Marcus regarded as a talented chef. After Marcus introduced us, Carlyle set the plates in front of us and retreated through a door that I assumed led to the kitchen. Carlyle is different than I had expected, I remarked. I had to admit the man was exceptionally talented, at least from a presentation standpoint. He had turned a salad into a minimalistic composition of edible art. Taking a small bite, I noted that the little bundle of color on my plate was at least as delicious as it was beautiful, with sliced heirloom beets, apple, and pickled fennel, all lightly glazed with a tangy vinaigrette. Marcus chuckled as he chewed. Don't let his appearance fool you. What do you... He's Negerais? Marcus nodded. And he serves you? I asked doubtfully. Doesn't he need to do Negerais things? With another chuckle, Marcus clarified. He works for me, Lex. We are born Negerais, like humans are born human or cats are born cats. It's not our occupation. Negerais is what we are, but we decide what we do. Oh, I said, a little abashed at my assumption. So Carlyle is a personal chef? Nodding, Marcus finished his bite. In a way, yes. We all find something we excel at, something we enjoy more than anything else. Call it our... He paused, thinking. Our passion. For Carlyle, it's the culinary arts and the organizing. Things, people, you name it, he can whip it into working shape. I was quiet for a few minutes, contemplating Marcus's words while I finished my salad. And you? I finally asked, leaning in with interest. What's your passion? Marcus waited for Carlyle to switch out our plates before answering. Instead of a mini salad, I now had 2 delicately flavored fish tacos, blessedly more substantial than the previous course. I started eating, not so patiently waiting for Marcus's response. I am a fighter, a warrior, he eventually said. Lex, you know I am on the council. Well, my role there is militaristic. I'm our people's general. It's what I'm good at, and what I enjoy. His serious tone implied something graver than his words alone suggested, something I had yet to grasp. Slowly I shook my head, feeling a crease appear between my eyebrows. Damn it, Lex, Marcus said with surprising ferocity, and I flinched imperceptibly. You must understand this. He held my eyes, his demanding stare boring into me. Strategy and death, that is what I am. Is what I've been for millennia. Is he trying to scare me off? He was a fool if he was, and Marcus was no fool. The embodiment of tranquility, I said. That's very interesting. Interesting? He looked baffled. Yeah, Marcus, interesting. You hurt people. Like you hurt Mike, I thought. You kill people. I glanced down at my plate, considering how best to say what I felt. I get it, and, I'm okay with it. At least, I was fairly certain that I was. How many battles has he fought? How many wars has he been a part of? Were they human wars or other unknown to me Negerais wars? How much death has he caused? Exactly how old are you, anyway? Caught off guard by my question, Marcus's domineering presence evaporated. While I waited for his response, I ate everything. Carlyle was a genius. Marcus took his time, eating and watching me, not speaking. Okay, I said, realizing he wasn't going to answer. So, Horus, is the god named after you or you after him? I asked, using a less direct tactic. It would at least give me an over-under. Please say you're named after the god, I thought. Please tell me you're under 5,000 years old. Are you sure you want to know? The truth is the truth, but you cannot unknow it. After reading my silence as acquiescence, he looked into my eyes and answered my question. I inspired the myths. My stomach dropped. Oh my God, I said, at a loss for real, meaningful words. If he inspired the Heru myths, then he had to be at least 5,000 years old, give or take a millennia or two. The world had changed so much in that time. Civilizations had risen and fallen. Thousands of wars had been fought. Had he been involved in most of them? All of them? How could a relationship between us ever work? How could I ever be enough for a man who had walked the earth for more than 5 millennia? I shook my head back and forth, staring at him with eyes wide from both shock and awe. You're... My God. Carlyle, Marcus called out. Bring wine with the next course. Numb, I looked down at the suddenly full plate before me. A plump fillet of beef tempted me with its promised deliciousness. But Marcus is older than Alexander. Older than the Egyptian civilization. How many people has he killed? How many women has he slept with? How many has he loved? How many children has he fathered? How many... Marcus said nothing for a long time, other than telling Carlyle to leave the bottle while I worked through my questions. I demolished the steak and wine with an intensity usually reserved for kneading bread or beating the crap out of someone. And suddenly, unexpectedly, I decided that it didn't matter. It didn't matter that my life so far had been a blink in comparison to his, or that he might grow bored of me in another blink. I wouldn't let my self-doubt get in the way of knowing the man who had inspired one of ancient Egypt's most beloved and fearsome gods. I wanted to know Heru. I wanted to know Marcus. I wanted to know him. Okay, I said. What else? For a moment, I thought he might ignore me, staring as he was at his empty plate. Josh, Dominic, and Nephi are Negerais. They know that you are too. Okay, I said quietly. He held his breath for a moment. And Nephi is my daughter. He sounded resolute in his defeat. Like with that statement, I would run for the hills, shunning him, his excavation, and our people as I fled. I thought about Marcus's age and Nephi's status as a Negerette, and a horrid, cold feeling seeped into my spine. What's Nephi's full name, Marcus? Neferure. Neferure, I repeated. As in... Hatshepsut's daughter, yes. He finished for me. Oh my God, I whispered. Neferure, the daughter of the famous female pharaoh, had disappeared from historical record as a young woman. Her mummy had never been found, though a tomb had been constructed for her. Well, I guess that explains the mystery of the missing princess, I thought. Marcus refilled our wine glasses, emptying the bottle between us, but remained quiet. The others, are they your kids too? Josh and Dominic? When I nodded, he said, No. Carlyle? I asked. No. Carlyle is only a few centuries old, and I haven't fathered a child in over 1,000 years, Marcus explained. Our plates were replaced twice more, and a second bottle of wine had been brought out while I processed the information. Finally, Marcus said, You must have other questions, Lex,
Now is the time to ask them.
It was the understatement of the century. I had other questions like stray dogs had fleas. What are your talents? Obviously you can cloak yourself, or whatever the correct terminology is, but do you have any others? I asked, genuinely curious. For the briefest moment, Marcus looked offended, but the dark emotion quickly melted into amusement.
You should know, Lex, that asking a Nezharet about his talents is akin to asking a woman how many men she's bedded. So, how many men have you bedded?
I waved his question away. But Alexander didn't mind, I explained. I don't need to know everything. It's okay. I'm sorry if that was rude. I looked down at my hands, which were resting on my lap, wondering if there was any way to hide my sudden shame.
Lex, Marcus said, his tone like honey dripping onto white-hot coals. I'm not offended. If I were weak or had no talents, I might be, but I am neither of those things. Just be mindful in the future of whom you ask that question, okay?
After a weak nod, I raised my eyes to meet his. He smiled genuinely.
My main talents are that I'm a manipulator, which includes the cloak you witnessed, and a tracker, so I can follow another's ba as it journeys through the art.
His gaze turned sharp as he said,
Quid pro quo, little Ivanov. Have you discovered any talents yet?
Yeah, I'm a finder, and to some degree, I'm a seer, I responded nonchalantly. Inside, I was bubbling, eager for his approval. For the first time, Marcus was visibly stunned.
I hope you realize how unusual it is for one of our kind to discover so many talents within a few weeks of manifesting.
Sure, I guess, I said, when in reality I hadn't realized it, even with Alexander's proud, grandfatherly reaction to my skills. Taking a sip from my recently refilled wine glass, I bolstered my nerve. I had overstepped one huge boundary already, so I figured it wouldn't hurt to jump over a few more. Alexander was able to test me for the finding talent. Can you do the same with me for manipulating and tracking? Marcus looked into my eyes, his black-rimmed gold meeting my sienna, as he silently struggled with something. He licked his lips before speaking, an unusual display of nerves.
For tracking, yes, but there is no need to test you for manipulating.
Why not? You don't think it's possible? I asked, feeling slighted. You know, I might surprise you.
Evidently.
He took a long, deep breath through his nose.
There's no need to test you for the manipulating talent, because we already know you can do it.
What? I asked, my mouth open in surprise. Patiently, he explained.
You lifted my cloak in the Echo. Only a manipulator, someone who could alter the very fabric of the art, could achieve such a feat.
Oh, sorry for getting snippy. I apologized.
Don't be. I like you when you're snippy.
And with that simple phrase, the business side of our conversation evaporated. Do you live here alone? I asked, glancing around at the un-Marcus-like decor.
Carlyle stays here, as does Nephi, he replied cautiously, reminding me of his 3,500-year-old daughter,
who seemed to despise me. Is that normal for you and Nephi? Does she also live with you in Oxford? Before he could answer, a thought occurred to me, and I added, Are you really a visiting professor from Oxford, or is that just a cover for being Nezharet? Smiling, Marcus said,
It's not just a cover. I enjoy it, though I rarely actually teach humans. There are quite a few Nezharets at Oxford, and I focus my attention on them, helping them to get the degrees they need to do what they want to do in the human world. And thankfully, no, I don't usually cohabitate with my daughter. I love her dearly, but after millennia we'd slaughter each other if we spent too much time together. We're only sharing this little house now because of its convenient location near campus, and truthfully, we almost never occupy it at the same time. My line has another much larger compound on the Bainbridge Island,
Nephi prefers it, and she finds the daily ferry rides calming.
I made a very unladylike snort, thinking Nephi could use a little more calming. Hesitantly, I asked, Is there a particular reason why she's so hostile toward me? Marcus's slow, silky smile was half the answer.
She's worried I won't be able to focus on my work.
But it's just an excavation. How is that at all interesting when you lived through the time period you're uncovering? His raised eyebrows and pursed lips seemed to say,
Come on, Lex, I expect more from you. Think about it.
Several puzzle pieces suddenly snapped into place. Nuin, father of Negerai kind, as Noon, Hatshepsut and Marcus, the mention of Set and Nuin on Senenmut's tablet, a Negerai excavation surrounding a secret temple that had been hidden by someone manipulating the Aht, the nothingness in the future Aht. I slapped my forehead. Oh my God, how could I be so blind? This whole excavation is about the solstice, isn't it? It's about trying to stop the nothingness from taking over the possible futures in the Aht. You think there's something in Senenmut's secret temple that can prevent it? Reading the subtle approval in Marcus's eyes, I thought back on the tablet I had deciphered. Senenmut had written that Noon's power, creation, was locked away in the secret temple. Marcus, I exclaimed breathily, are you telling me that Nuin's power is a real thing? That it's really in there? He nodded, one slight, sharp movement. Oh, well, that's just...
Crazy? Impossible? Terrifying? Marcus offered. Yes, I quite agree. And what makes it even worse is that we don't really know what his power is. I knew him, Lex. I spent time with him, and he never seemed anything but the strongest of us all. He looked around, shaking his head with frustration, or possibly disbelief. I have spent millennia wondering what his mysterious power might be, and he laughed bitterly. I just don't know.
While I processed Marcus's revelations, Carlyle brought out dessert, 2 small plates and a tray containing a variety of delicate confections. He added a clear, dainty bottle of Tokai to the table for good measure. Marcus poured a few inches of the dessert wine into each of our glasses. It was the color of golden raisins. I popped a bite-sized fruit tart, lemon custard contained in flaky, buttery crust and topped with a blueberry, raspberry, and strawberry slice, into my mouth. It was heavenly. Swallowing, I studied my wine glass, then looked at Marcus. If I didn't know any better, I'd say you were trying to get me drunk for nefarious purposes, Professor Bahur, I said, purposely diverting our conversation to a lighter subject. After all of the delicious food and wine, I was hardly in the best state of mind to contemplate such serious matters as mysterious powers and the impending nothingness. Marcus licked a bit of chocolate filling from a tiny cream puff off the tip of his thumb.
But, Miss Larson, what would possibly make you think you know better?
Because you won't make it that easy, I said, completely unsure of my words.
Perhaps, he purred. And perhaps not.
He leaned forward as if he might whisper some forbidden secret, and I suddenly felt his fingertips tracing the top of my boot. His thumb played tenderly with the back of my knee. Closing my eyes, I shuddered involuntarily. His gentle touch sent bolts of electricity along my nerves. I couldn't believe the sensations he was eliciting simply by touching my knee. Deliberately, he inched his hand up the bare skin of my outer thigh, pausing halfway up. My heart felt like it had been relocated to my groin, and with each pump, like it might explode. My breaths became shorter, quicker, my lungs tightening every time I inhaled.
But only if you beg,
Marcus whispered. His words from when we had been in the Echo together resounded in my head.
By the time our courtship is through, you'll beg me to take you to bed. Will you do it now, so soon? He asked. So easily?
My eyes shot open, then narrowed to slits.
You'll have to try harder, Marcus, I said softly. His smile was roguish as he whispered, You have no idea how much I wanted to hear you say that. He withdrew his hand. I rearranged my skirt and crossed my legs, emphasizing my decision. It was possible that, one day, I would beg. But one day, I decided, so would he. It's late. I should get you home, Marcus said, taking another sip of the golden dessert wine before standing. Can we walk? I asked, accepting his offered hand. I wanted to extend my time with him, and the cool night air sounded refreshing. It's snowing, he objected. Exactly. Can you walk that far in those boots and in the snow? He asked suspiciously. He led the way back to the front door, collecting my coat from a closet along the way. Seriously, Marcus, it's not that far. Besides, I was a ballet dancer growing up. I've done a lot more in far less comfortable shoes. I could feel his eyes examining every inch of my body, devouring my every movement as I shrugged into my coat. Ballet, One side of his mouth turned up in a sly grin. That explains much. Like what? Wear these, he said, handing me some fur-lined black leather gloves and wrapping the softest scarf I had ever felt around my neck. The way you walk, the way you move, just the way you are, so graceful. It's very appealing. I mused. Finding out what attracted him to me gave me confidence, and equally important, power. Marcus had been using his enigmatic and unavoidable sex appeal to manipulate me since our first unofficial meeting at the bar. The scales were beginning to even out. At least a little. Marcus pulled my hair out from the charcoal gray scarf and arranged it on my shoulders. Whose are these? I asked, holding up my gloved hands and touching the scarf. Nephie's, he informed me. Oh, maybe I shouldn't wear them. I began to pull the gloves off, but Marcus stopped me. She'll never notice they're gone. That girl has more clothing than a department store, he said irritably. So says a guy with an Aston Martin and a suit for every day of the century. Shall we? He said, opening the front door. I took his proffered arm, and together we stepped into the gently falling snow. We took a path through campus, letting the empty streets and brick buildings transport us to an earlier time period. You're very tall, I said, breaking the silence halfway through the midnight stroll. Correct. I laughed softly. No, I meant, how are you so tall? You were born thousands of years ago. You shouldn't be anywhere near as tall as you are. Also correct, he said, infuriating me, probably on purpose. So? He chuckled. Before I manifested, I was around your height, maybe a bit taller. I was tall for the time and among my people. But one of the changes we all experience is the fulfillment of our physical potential. Had I grown up with ideal nutrition and care, I would have reached my current height, but that was impossible then. The changes, the cellular regeneration, it fixes all of that. Huh. So I won't be as tall as you in a year, right? I asked, seeking confirmation. You've grown up in a time and place that provided you with all the nutrients you needed. So, thankfully, no. I was never a big fan of the Amazon mythology. I doubt you'll even gain an inch. This is all so strange, you know? It's like a dream I could wake from at any moment, I said, my voice hushed. Marcus's arm tensed in mine. Would you want to wake up? He sounded a little sad. I hugged his arm with both of mine and said, Not anymore. When Marcus abruptly stopped, I almost slipped on the slick brick path. With his free hand, he turned me to face him. His cool, leather-clad fingers cupped either side of my face, tilting it up so he could examine my features better in the light of a distant street lamp. I could feel the faint kiss of each snowflake as it landed on my face. What are you, Alexandra Ivanov? He breathed. What are you that you are doing this to me? As his deep, silky voice released each word into the starless night, I leaned closer. Our individual white puffs of breath slowly merged, becoming indistinguishable. But... Shh, little Ivanov, he murmured, closing the distance between our mouths. His lips touched mine with the faintest possible pressure, brushing first one way, then the other. When I tried to deepen the kiss, he pulled back enough to maintain the maddening softness. I slipped my fingertips into his coat pockets, pulling his body closer to mine, and groaned in frustration. I wanted more, needed more. One of Marcus's arms dropped lower, his palm pressing into my lower back, and he grasped the nape of my neck with his other hand. He had understood my desire, and he had complied. His burning lips worked furiously against mine, and his tongue delved into my mouth, exploring my own with a skill and sensuality I had never before experienced. Purposefully, I not so gently bit his lower lip, earning a growl. He responded by shifting his hand from my back to the swell of my hips and pulling me even closer to him. His fervent mouth laid a trail of fire across my cheek and jaw, then down to the tender flesh of my neck. His lips became feather-light, perfectly straddling the line between tingle and tickle. "Beg me," he whispered against my skin, making me shiver. "Beg me to take you right here, right now." I whimpered. I really, really wanted to. "Beg me, Lex," he repeated, shifting his leg so it pressed into my coat's conveniently placed lower button. I moaned brazenly. "Lex, beg me," he said roughly. I could hear in his voice that nothing less than my desperate pleading would make him take the next step. Oh, I was almost certain that he wanted me just as badly as I wanted him, but I was starting to understand him. This man who had inspired millennia-old myths, who had seen the Egyptian, Greek, and Roman civilizations rise and fall. For Marcus, sex was about more than desire. It was also about control. In the heat of the moment, I almost acquiesced. I almost begged him to lift my skirt and to take me in the shadows of the abandoned midnight campus. But I wasn't ready to give up that little piece of control I had left in my life. "No," I whispered, the single word audibly hoarse. Embarrassingly, I was pretty much panting from the way his leg was manipulating that damn button. With a throaty laugh, Marcus returned his attention to my lips, kissing them tenderly. "You will. Soon." "I hope you're prepared to wait," I said with a victorious smile. In my head, I was wondering if I would even be able to hold out until the following day. He kissed me one last time before moving his mouth to my ear and whispering, "However long, little Ivanov, it will be worth the wait." Thanks for listening to the Read by the Author podcast. To find out what happens next in the story, stay tuned for the next episode. You can also find Echo in Time, as well as the rest of the Echo Trilogy, in ebook, paperback, and professionally narrated audiobook format through all major book retailers, and libraries too. Until next time, happy reading!